interventions for individuals with autism spectrum disorder implemented in various general education settings. So please go ahead and take it away, Dr. Ostryn.
Perfect, thank you. So, yep, I did a 5-year review, a year on social communication interventions for individuals with autism, but we were looking at general education settings. So we were not looking at therapy rooms one-on-one, we were looking in the environment. So just a quick background, being a functional communicator, it's a complex set of skills. All our behavior is communication-based, the way we interact with people, and our language and our social communications are shaped by environment. For instance, anyone who's had a little baby or been around a little baby, the baby's sitting there and starts to go, mama. Well, mama jumps right in and reinforces that mama to turn into mama. You know, and it can also bite us in the butt when we have kids. So I got a kiddo who's screaming, I give them the iPad, I give them a candy. Guess what? I made that reinforcement loop happen. They're going to cry again for that. So that's kind of what happens. It's this back and forth shaping behaviors. For typical people, these are not taught. They're not explicitly taught. We pick up in the environment. We see what's going on around us. We learn from other people. We learn in a general environment. We also generalize these. We are not taught every behavior or communication we need. We are taught one or two, and then we learn the hidden rules of the world, and we're able to generalize what happens to the next environment. For instance, you see a kiddo getting in trouble for chewing gum in class. You go to yourself, I'm not going to chew gum. Nobody taught you not to chew gum. You just kind of picked it up in the environment. So a quick review of autism. There's deficits in social skills, understanding and reading situations, not understanding the other person's point of view, not seeing how to act in a situation, deficits in communication. They can be non-vocal or non-verbal. They're typically not socially reinforced, so they're not your group of people who are going to go out and want to hang with friends. They're much more concrete thinkers. And some may have repetitive patterns of behavior known as stimming. And that sometimes makes them stick out in a social situation. So generally, they're not they don't have ideal social skills, and they need help with that. So the purpose of the review was to look at, you know what, I need to move my people because you're in my way of my words. Here you go. Research indicates that educating individuals with their peers is gold star. That's what we want. We don't want to put them in separate rooms. We don't want to put them in special centers. We don't want to do a pull out. We want to get inclusion. We want them with peers. We want them in natural environments. When they're in natural environments, they get natural reinforcements. We don't have to contrive them. And so it helps to build in generalization. If they're with their peers, we go to different settings, we're in different classrooms, we're in different areas. And it's the least restrictive environment which we want. We want our children with autism to be in the least restrictive possible, where they can still gain skills. So this review investigated the current literature for the past 5 years for teaching social communications in general education settings for people with autism. The inclusion criteria was pretty simple, had to be an experimental design published within the past 5 years. This was published last year. Include participants between 3 and 21. We did that so we can hit preschoolers and people with disabilities who go to age 21 in the school system. Implemented in an inclusive learning setting. So it had to be some kind of inclusive setting in a general education setting, and included a communication intervention as the independent variable. When we applied this criteria, we had 25 studies. Some of the components, we obviously broke it down to participants and the demographics, you know, male, females, ages, the types of settings. Were they schools? Were they classrooms? Were they preschools? Were they high school? Were they middle school? We broke it down to how the authors described their IVs and DVs. So what did they implement and what were they measuring? We looked at verbal operants, and we kind of applied that as a kind of structure. So verbal operants are the types of behaviors we have for communication. I have 3 written here: mands, tacts, and intraverbal. A mand is simply a request for something. A tact is a labeling of something. And an intraverbal is a communication where something isn't in front of you. So I may say something like, "You got a bowl of ice cream? What are you going to need for that?" I need a spoon. Spoon wasn't in front of me, but I learned that was what I needed to put in the conversation. We looked at what ABA principles were used in the interventions. So applied behavior analysis is the only evidence-based treatment for working with people with autism. And I warn people to be cautious because some people say they're research-based, and it's not the same as being evidence-based. ABA is a treatment for changing behavior, really. based on a schedule of reinforcement. It's a very reinforcing treatment. We deal with teaching new skills and putting in a big layer of reinforcement. We also looked at intervention factors. So we looked at all the differences within the studies in length and intervention. How long were the kiddos in intervention for? How often were they getting the intervention? Who was implementing it? Oh, was it students, graduate students, professors, teachers? And we looked at social validity measures and then the reliability and the treatment outcomes. So what we did is we took all the studies and we just pulled apart all the different components and tried to build a table to see, are there any overlapping factors? You know, what are people doing? What's the kind of research that's going on right now? So our findings were, now this was a good finding, 23 out of 25 studies taught social communications initiations. What tends to happen when someone doesn't have good skills or good communication is we tend to teach them to answer things because it's easier to get someone to answer because I'll just prompt you the answer. It was very good that what they did is they set up scenarios to ensure that the kiddos or the students with autism were actually initiating, which is definitely a harder thing to do. It was not surprising that we found mans were the most taught verbal operant. And I say that because we use mans the most in our lives. We're requesting all the time. And it is the first communication that people will have when they develop. If you go back to thinking about kiddos, babies and stuff, the first thing they'll do is say a word for something they want. Mama, cup, bear, dada. So it's not surprising that when we have kiddos that have delayed communication, that we're still focusing a lot on requesting. What's interesting is we went a little further. Rather than look at just what the authors and the investigators said they were teaching, we looked at their procedures and tried to find other skills. So for instance, if they're teaching mans, if they say, oh, we want to teach our children to ask for things at the sandbox or something, or ask for something in the playground, there's also a whole bunch of other skills going on, because you'll say it to me and then I have a listener responder skill, because then I'm going to go get the item. So we tried to pull apart and say there's actually more being researched here than people are saying. One of the problems with that was there was lack of procedures. I'm sure everyone's come across when you read an article, you wish they could give more information because you're like, oh, how did they do that? How did they do that? So we do think that there were probably some skills being taught, but because there was no detailed procedures, we're unable to make that conclusion. It was very good to see a wide range of general education settings. You know, typically people would always say, we're doing inclusion around lunch and recess. We're not really going in the classroom. We're not really doing it in math class, or we're not really doing it in an academic subject. It was always easier to stick to the easy parts of the day, which was lunch and recess. But it was really good that we saw a bunch of academic classrooms being used. Okay. No one else is having the same problem I am, where everyone's faces are in the middle of my thing. Okay, one of the great things, yay, that we found was there's so much research on kiddos with autism working with peers, and the peers being kind of the teachers and the interventionists. And that's what's so great. There's no better teacher for a kiddo than a kiddo. Right? I feel like our kids with autism spend most of their time around 4-year-old women. You know, I just do. And I'm like, we're not kids. We don't think like kids. We don't talk like kids. We don't act like kids. So the best thing we want to do is stick them all together. And it was really great that 24 of the studies did this. They used peers in some way, as a communicative partner, as someone to work with the kiddo, as a model. So sometimes we'll say, oh, look at such and such doing X, Y, Z. Oh, there's your model. So that was really good. This supports a lot of previous research. We really want kids to be in typical classrooms with typical kids. So here's what's really interesting. And this is no shocking brain science finding that we came up with. We looked at all these different components and it was across the board. This is only a couple of the studies. Everything was different. The implementers were different. The time and intervention was different. What they were doing were different. What they were looking at, all the different settings. There was so much variability that the only thing that stuck out as being constant was time and intervention. So it was how long a kiddo was in intervention. So it had to be more than 2 months in order for there to be the best effect size or the most successful intervention, which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense, because the more time you're in an intervention, the more time you have in direct or explicit instruction, the more time you get to practice, the more opportunities you're going to get, the more opportunities for reinforcement you're going to get. So think about it, is when you're practicing a skill, the more you practice over the longest time, well, guess what? The better you're going to get at it. So this was really important, that these very short, intensive interventions do not work as much as the ones that go over time. Over time is really important. They have, one thing is they have more opportunities to practice, and then it's almost like they get new probes. So if you practice on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday and a Friday and a Saturday, you're going to do pretty good. But if you practice on a Monday and then I come back on a Wednesday and then I come back on a Saturday and then we do it again, you're getting that constant practice. You're also getting more support, more prompting and guidance to shape your new skill. That's what we do in ABA. We shape a skill. You get reinforcement for getting better at a skill before it becomes kind of more automatic. And, you know, we don't do anything without reinforcement. Behavior analysis is clear that all our behaviors are controlled by the reinforcement value and the punishment value in our environments. So if my kiddo's behavior is subjected to more reinforcement, it's more likely we're going to keep repeating that pattern over and over again. And that comes back to the whole idea of explicit and direct instruction. We all learn that way. We all learn through direct instruction and explicit instruction. So that was a common factor throughout this review. I think I'm done. I don't even see my time. Look at that. 3 minutes to spare.
3 minutes to spare.